Git is a distributed version control system. Now the problem is, if you want to understand Git, you have to first understand what do you mean by version control, right? And then we can discuss about version control system, then we can discuss about why it is called distributed, and then Git will make much more sense. So let's talk about version control. See, the thing is, when you make a project, of course, it can be any project. It can be a software project, or it can be writing a book or making videos. It's all about a project, right? And when you make a project, the way you work is you create different versions of it, right? Okay, so if you don't want to say version, let's say you make multiple updates. So when I start writing a book, I will write something and then I will edit the same file. Or maybe I want to go back to my previous file. So let's say if I'm writing chapter 1, I will complete that chapter 1 and then I will go for chapter 2, chapter 3. Now at every chapter end, I will just try to save it, right? And then on chapter 2, I will try to save a file. On chapter 3, I want to save a file. Or maybe while writing this chapter, in between, I will do the save, right? And saving is very important, right? Otherwise, if your laptop crashes, you will lose all the data. So as a writer, we normally say Control S not once, multiple times, just to be on the safe side. The important part here is we want to make the copies of it. Now there are multiple ways of doing it. What you can do is you can save the same file. The thing is, if you save the same file, you will lose the previous file, right? Or what you can do is you can create a new file. So every new update will be a new file. And as a software developer, we used to do that. In my college days, I remember when we used to create project, every time we add a new feature, we used to create a new folder. And let me know if you have done this, or maybe you can just give a smile if you have done this. We create a project and then we give a name to it. Let's say the project is for a quiz application. So you will say quiz app. And then if you think this is, now we have added few features, we can say quiz app 1, quiz app 2, quiz app 3. Of course, it will have a new updates, new features in that particular new folder, right? And then the moment you feel that project is complete, you say quiz app final. Then you say quiz app final, because maybe you want to make some final changes. And then you realize, oh, there's a bug. Then you say quiz app final, very final. Okay, so this is the type of folder we used to create. The thing is, why do we do this? It's because what if you want to go back to the previous version? What if you have created a project and then it's working and now you added new features? And then you thought it is working, but it's not. There are some bugs. You may want to go back to the previous version. Right? Now having that version called, or having that power of going back to any version, that is called version control. And to achieve this, we need to use some software, right? Some system. And that system is called a version control system. So example, if you're building a project, you will be saving that file multiple times and then you will not replace the older project. The older project will be there, right? So let's say you have a software with X number of features. So you got the first 2 features in the first version, then you got the third feature on the second version, and at any given point, you can go back to the previous version. Also, what if you are not alone in the project? You have multiple people working in the same project. How do you collaborate? That's also important, right? So you will get those features with the help of version control. And as I mentioned before, you need a system, so we call it as a version control system. Now when you talk about version control system, we can categorize into 3 parts here. The first one is a local version control, which simply means that as a developer or as a creator, if I write softwares or if I write a book, if I write something and if I want to save in my own machine with different versions, of course, that is local copy, right? And in my own particular machine, I'm creating different versions of it, maybe having a folder inside a folder, then having different folders of it. Or maybe I can just create a database where I will save all these files. Again, that's my choice, or that depends upon the version control system. But the thing is, everything is happening on my machine. The problem here is, what if I want to collaborate with other people? I have, let's say, 5 people in the team, and we all want to work on the same project. How will we do that? And also, what if I'm relying on my machine and then one day my machine says, okay, I'm done, I'm not going to start again. How will you get your projects? And that's where you can't simply rely on local copy. And that's where we have one more option, which is called CVCS. So VCS is version control system. CVCS is your centralized version control system. Now, in this case, what you do is, let's say you have 5 people in the network, or 5 people want to work on the same project. So what you will do is you will use a central repository, not the local one, but a remote one. So all these machines which you are working on in different locations in the world, you will be having a centralized version control system. Now at this point, every time you want to make a change, you have to get the copy from the centralized system, make the changes in your machine, and then you have to save it on the centralized version control system, which is CVCS. Now the problem with this is, okay, first of all, let's talk about the advantage. The advantage is, if you're working in a file of a group, everyone have access to it. So they will know what you're working on. So let's say you have done something, and then when you say save, now basically since we're talking about Git, let's use the word which we use in Git called commit. So let's say when you commit something to the centralized server, now at this point, the other people will have a recent code. They know what you're doing, right? But also there's a problem. The problem is everything is stored on a central system, right? What if the central server says, I'm done, I'm not going to start again. Your data is gone now, right? So that's the problem with the centralized version control system. Now that's where we have to look for an alternative, where you should be able to have a copy on your machine as well, and not just the current version. You should have the history as well. Because in the centralized version, even if your server goes down, at least you have a local copy of the current version. Yes, you have it, but we don't want just current version. What we want is the history, right? And that's where you can use something called a distributed version control system, where you will have a local copy, but not just the current version. You will have the entire commit history. So let's say you have created version 1, version 2, version 3, everything will be present in your local machine as well. And you can collaborate with the other developers or with your colleagues basically. So we have done with the first step of what is Git by understanding something called version control system. Now, the more theoretical concept you know, it will be easier for you to work on the Git software, right? So basically, Git is a distributed, which means you will have a local copy. Of course, you can have a remote copy as well. There are a lot of options available. Example, let's say if we talk about GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, all these are your remote repositories. So you will have a copy there, plus you will have a copy on your local machine as well. So let's say someday if you want to work in a long flight and you don't have internet access, you can still work on your project because you have everything in your own machine. Now in the next video, let's try to understand the history of Git, how it started, and let's try to go a bit technical.